Folding screen phones have always been incredibly interesting to me. The idea that you can have something that looks like a normal phone and then flip it open and you basically have a tablet. For some reason, just this year, I finally got into folding phones. This is my first large-scale folding phone, the Z Fold 6. You guys might have caught my review of the Motorola Razr Plus 2024, another folding screen phone that I also really love. And I'm also not kidding when I say I went all in on foldable phones, because I also bought the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 6, which should be coming in the next day or two. So I've got a lot of foldable phones now, probably more than anyone's ever needed in their entire life, but my favorite so far is the Z Fold 6. And let's be real, it should be. It's a $2,000 phone, which is absurd for a phone. You can buy a really decent laptop for $2,000. I mean, a really great laptop for $2,000, and I just spent that on this tiny little pocket tablet. So in today's review, my goal is to answer the question, is the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 6 actually worth it? And I can tell you from owning this phone for about a week at this point, that's a tough question to answer. But let's start things off by talking about some of the differences between the brand new Galaxy Z Fold 6 and last year's Z Fold 5. First of all, the price. The price has actually gone up $100 over the last year for this new model of the phone, which is odd because you'd think for a phone like this, the price should steadily be going down. I understand that inflation's a thing, and that's probably what Samsung is claiming the price increase is for, but at the same time, it's not like this phone is that different from last year's model, so do you really need to raise the price? I don't know. But probably the most noticeable difference between this phone and last year's phone is the slightly larger outer screen. So not only have they squared off the edges of the phone and squared off the screen itself, but they've increased the size of the screen by 3 millimeters. And really the way that they've done that is just by decreasing the size of the bezels around the screen, which I actually don't mind. And I think this front screen is actually a decent size now. Before, it just seemed so thin. And while sure, this phone is generally still the same dimensions as last year's phone, this squared off shape really does make a big difference. Speaking of the dimensions, another change is that this phone is a little bit thinner than last year's phone, which is definitely a good thing when the phone is this thick. I mean, sure, when you open it up, it's very thin, but when you close it up to put it in your pocket, it's a chunky boy. The diagonal dimension of the outer screen is now 6.3 inches instead of 6.2 inches, but a lot of that could be attributed to the fact that it's got a more squared off shape than a rounded shape on the corners. Well, I guess it is still rounded on the corners, but it's a much smaller radius. But we'll get into more differences between the 6 and the 5 as we continue on in the review. Some other notable details about the front screen of the device is that it's covered in Gorilla Glass Victus 2, which actually also so is the back of the phone as well. It's definitely a durable glass, but at the end of the day, it is still glass. Of course, this outer screen does have an always-on display, and so does the inner screen, which is definitely a good thing. And over my last week of using this phone, I did find myself using this screen a good amount, and mainly to respond to text messages, to check my email, to check Instagram, Twitter, things like that, or I guess X, things like that. But when I really wanted to do some hardcore media consumption, I did pop open the screen and dive into the much larger 7.3-inch display. I mean, in a lot of ways, this outer screen is the same as a standard candy bar smartphone. It's a little bit thinner, so you're not going to be getting the same aspect ratio that you have on the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra or the iPhone 15 Pro, but it is similar enough to where, in a lot of cases, I didn't feel like I needed to open up the phone. Which is interesting, and one of the reasons why I'm not sure if spending $2,000 on this phone is totally worth it, but we'll get into that later on in the video. But continuing on into the inner screen, it is very, very large, like I mentioned, 7.3 inches. I mean, it's not exactly a square, I guess it is kind of a rectangle, and when you hold it like this, it does look more rectangular, but it is different, especially when you're used to using a phone like the S24 or the iPhone. Samsung did increase the brightness on the new Z Fold 6 compared to the Z Fold 5. It's now 2600 nits, which is solid. It does a decent job of being visible outside. However, the screen is very, very glossy, so you do get a lot of reflections on both actually the inner screen and the outer screen. They don't have that sort of non-reflective coating that you have on the S24 Ultra, which actually, come to think of it, is kind of a glaring omission. Like, that would have really been nice on this outer screen. I don't know if they could have done that on this inner screen, but for a $2,000 phone, the more that I think about it, I would expect this to be an S24 Ultra with a foldable screen. The more I think about it, the more I'm kind of annoyed by that. But hey, it is what it is. You're buying this phone knowing exactly what it is. You're not going to spend $2,000 on an impulse purchase. At least most people won't. I did. But most people won't. Like I mentioned, this inner display isn't always on display, and according to Samsung, the crease is slightly less visible on this phone than on the previous version. Now, I will say, it is still definitely visible, especially when the screen is turned off, but it's not as bad as I was expecting. When you look at the phone straight on, you don't actually see it too much. And in most cases, you won't even really interact with it. Like, maybe when you're swiping your hand across the screen, or maybe if you have the screen in horizontal mode like this, and you're swiping up and down a web page, but it's not that noticeable. But as much as I don't love this crease, at the end of the day, that's just how all foldable phones are, and most likely will be for the next couple years, so there's not really much you can do about it at this moment. That said, Samsung did apparently change up their hinge a little bit. It's the dual rail flex hinge, which has a strengthened folded edge. Not sure exactly what that means, but apparently it's better than it was last year. It's also IP48, which means that you can get some really decent water and some dust resistance. I believe IP48 is up to 5 minutes of submersion in fresh water for up to 30 minutes, which is decent. Like, I don't think you're gonna be throwing this phone in the pool anytime soon anyway. Plus, I just used this phone to take some photos outside in the rain, and it did totally fine. No issues whatsoever. Like most folding phones, this phone is not made for the beach. You don't want to take this with you to the beach. I mean, you can, but try and avoid using it on the beach. Apparently, the hinge is a little bit more dust resistant than it was, and these ridges on the outside of the screens are apparently designed to keep the screens from touching each other. So if you get dust or debris or sand in there or something, it won't compress that in between the two screens and damage the screen. It should just allow the dust to kind of bounce around on the inside of the phone, hopefully not scratching the screen, and then kind of fall out one of these holes around the edges of the hinge. But compared to the first version of foldable phones that came out like 5 years ago, this phone is a significant improvement. Is it perfect? Absolutely not, but it's definitely better than it was. Now, obviously, being a folding phone, you are going to want to open and close this phone a lot, and unfortunately, unlike the Motorola Razr, which is super easy to kind of flip open because the hinge is, I would say, a little bit looser, this hinge is very, very stiff, which, yes, might be good for durability and longevity, but is kind of a bummer to open and close. I do like it. I mean, it's very, very strong, and it does a good job of like really sitting in the position that you want it to, but it kind of does take a little bit of a to get it open. That's a terrible way of describing it, but what I mean is, you know what I'm saying? And I found that when closing it, you really do have to put your thumbs on the side of the phone and kind of do this. You can't really go from the bottom and do this. It just doesn't work. You really do have to put your thumbs right in the screen, which feels a little sketchy. I don't think it is, but it just feels a little bit like I'm gonna press into the screen a bit more than it should be pressed. Folding aside, this inner screen is truly a pleasure to use. It's a good size, and while the aspect ratio is a little odd, I actually really, really love it a lot because watching YouTube videos on it just really feels like you're watching on a tablet. I mean, look at this. If you guys didn't know, I have a sneaker channel, which is my main channel and filmed in the exact same set. But like I said, watching YouTube videos on this phone is incredible. The resolution's amazing, the color accuracy is beautiful. You do get some pretty large letterboxes on the top and on the bottom because of the aspect ratio, but not a big deal. And you can fold your phone like this. Maybe I have to pause the YouTube video to make it work. But you can fold your phone like this, and it just plays the video on the top half of the phone, and you have your controls here at the bottom. It's a really, really cool feature, and it's useful when you're sitting in bed. You just kind of want to watch your YouTube videos like this. I'll be honest, though, I've never used this feature once. I usually, when I'm watching YouTube, watch it full size, or if I'm being completely honest, a lot of times I'll pull it up on the outside screen and watch it in just the smallest way possible. I hate to admit that. I mean, if I'm driving with this phone and I want to listen to a podcast or something on YouTube, it's not like I can have the phone open like this. I kind of have to close it, slide it into my phone mount in my car, and then slide the YouTube video off the screen because I don't drive with YouTube videos on. But if I were to, I would have to do it like this and not like this. I really don't, though, for real. I mean, obviously, the reason that you buy this phone is for this huge screen. I mean, that's the whole point of foldable phones, to have a small footprint when it's closed and then have this massive screen when you open it up. And I really love that about this phone. I mean, it's a genuinely beautiful looking screen. It's crisp, the colors look amazing, it's got a really fast refresh rate. It's just all around a great screen. And according to Samsung, it's more durable than last year's model. I can't verify that because I don't have last year's model, but apparently it is. But another benefit to having this giant screen is, of course, gaming. And again, the aspect ratio is a little bit odd, but a lot of games automatically sort of adjust for that. Like, for example, this game, you just kind of have brown bars on the edges of the screen. Oh, I suck at this. There we go. Now, yes, I do definitely feel the crease in the middle of the screen, especially when I'm playing a game that kind of relies on me having my finger in the middle of the screen like this. But having a giant screen like this makes a game like this super, super immersive, and I really love that about it. And that's one of the main selling points of this phone. Just the overall immersion that you can't really get on any other device that isn't a large foldable like this. Now, powering all of this gaming goodness, you've got a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 with 12 gigabytes of RAM, which is enough. I have noticed that gaming on this phone for long stretches, it does get warm, specifically on this side of the phone, which is probably where most of the processing is happening. That's not unique to this phone, it happens with a lot of phones, but it did get warm, so keep that in mind. Obviously, compared to last year's Z Fold 5, the processor is faster, and that's another one of the changes between the 6 and the 5. That being said, is it night and day faster? No. You might not even notice a difference during day-to-day usage. I think the only time you really notice a difference is if you're doing like crazy intensive tasks or a benchmark, but it is a notable change, so I did want to note it. This is an awful transition, but speaking of noting, why don't we talk about some of the AI features that you get on this phone, like sketch to image. So sketch to image essentially is just an AI feature that allows you to draw something. Like, for example, let me draw a car. I have an industrial design degree. I should be good at drawing cars, but for some reason, this one, not so good, because I'm drawing with my finger. That's the excuse I'll use today. Okay, there is my awful F1 car. Now if I click the Samsung AI button, I can sketch to image, which allows me to outline the drawing that I did, and it'll create an AI art version of my sketch. It takes a second though, I'm not gonna lie, it's a long process. but it does get the job done. That's actually not bad. I'm gonna be honest, I was not that impressed with this feature before, but that's not bad. They do also give you a couple different options, so you can try different colors, different versions of your race car. That's probably my favorite, actually. It's a watercolor version. I've never seen a watercolor F1 car. Here's another car that I drew that I actually was also kind of impressed with, but it doesn't have that many art styles. Like, you can do pretty much watercolor, that's about it, and it's a feature that you do get sick of pretty quickly. I'll be honest, I don't know if there's too many real-world applications for this sketch to AI feature, but it is a very cool, fun little Easter egg that you have on this phone. And maybe in the future, it'll become more useful the more powerful that the AI gets, which is also scary, I'm not gonna lie. Another interesting AI feature is Portrait Studio, where you can take a picture of yourself like this, and then turn it into a piece of art in either the comic book style, 3D style, watercolor style, or sketch style. I'm gonna do 3D cartoon. Let's see if I look like I'm from Disney or not. Again, it takes a minute. It's not fast. That doesn't seem right. For some reason, you've got construction worker Seth, you've got baseball player Seth, you've got actually kind of regular Seth there, and then you've got lumberjack Seth. It's interesting too, I've noticed that they actually change your mouth, so a lot of times I'll have my mouth open or closed or whatever, and it'll be the exact opposite of what I'm doing in the actual picture in this AI generated image. That is if me and Seth Curry had a baby. Seth Curry, actually Steph Curry's brother. You've got golfer Seth. Now I'll be honest, in the unboxing of this phone, I was pretty unhappy with the versions of my face that they had created. But good news is, this time around, not bad. I'm so aggressive in that one. I just don't know why. Why do I look like I'm wearing a bucket hat too? Again, Steph Curry. I'm getting Steph Curry in a lot of these pictures. I don't know why. That aside, it is a fun AI feature that realistically you'll use once and then never use it again. It's not necessary, but it is part of Samsung's AI suite, which, to be fair, is coming to the Z Fold 5, and of course most other recent Samsung phones. So it's not really a reason to buy the Z Fold 6 over the 5 because it will come to the 5 very soon. However, one feature that I absolutely love on Samsung phones is Circle to Search, which allows you to find an image of something that you're interested in. Like, for example, here's a picture of a shoe from one of my recent sneaker reviews. You hold down the home button and then you circle the part of the image that you want to search. So for example, I'm searching that shoe and there it is. The Adidas Gazelle Indoor Bad Bunny collaboration, the Bonito colorway. It's so fast, it's so quick, it's such a useful feature. It gives you links to StockX, which is a place to buy sneakers, Goat, eBay, articles on the shoe, Instagram pictures. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing and I love it. But in addition to that, there's some other pretty solid AI features like Note Assist, where you can transcribe meetings into notes. Of course, you have Google Gemini, which is not a Samsung thing, it's a Google thing, but it's also fine. Another cool feature specifically on Samsung foldable phones is the Interpreter app. You can set your phone like this down in front of someone who speaks a different language and talk to your phone, say whatever you want, and then it translates that to a text message right there on the front of your phone, and then they respond to you and you get the translated version on the other side of the screen. For example, if I'm talking to someone in Spanish, I can say something in English, comes out as Spanish on this side of the phone, they talk back to me in Spanish, comes back as English on this side of the phone. It's incredible. And that, actually, come to think of it, might be one of the only foldable phone AI specific features that I really, really like. But really quick, let's talk about battery life. And unfortunately, one of the changes that Samsung made was not increasing the size of the battery. It's still 4,400 milliamp hours, which is not enough. Day-to-day usage, you can get away with like a full workday, and probably most of the day if you're not using it too much, but it dies pretty quick, faster than it should. Also, it still only has 25-watt charging, which is not fast at all. It takes a while for this phone to get fully juiced up. It's kind of annoying, especially when the competition out there has 50-watt charging and faster. It just seems unnecessarily slow. But now let's talk about one of my favorite features of any phone, and that of course is the camera array and camera setup. Now on this phone, unfortunately, it is pretty similar to what you had last year. Like I already mentioned, you've got a 4 megapixel front-facing camera on the inside of the phone, you've got a 10 megapixel front-facing camera on the outer screen of the phone, and then moving to the back camera array, you've got 3 different cameras. You've got a 50 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra-wide, and a 10 megapixel telephoto, which by itself is not bad, but again, it's very similar to last year's phone, and when you compare it to the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra, which has a 200 megapixel main camera, it's definitely lacking. It's mainly lacking when it comes to zoom, like the optical zoom is nowhere near as far as it is on the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. And the only reason I'm harping on this a lot is because this is a $2,000 phone. And for a $2,000 phone, you would hope that they throw on the best cameras from the S24 Ultra onto this phone because you're paying $800 more on this phone than you are the S24 Ultra. So it's kind of like, come on. Like, come on. And as a YouTuber and a vlogger, the idea of foldable phones as vlogging phones is really interesting to me. One of the things that I love about the Motorola Razr is that you can film yourself like this because you've got the 2 main cameras on the outer screen, and this outer screen acts as a viewfinder, so you've got this amazing little vlogging camera. This phone has so much potential to be an excellent vlogging camera, but because the cameras aren't as nice as they could be, especially for the price, it's a tougher sell. Now obviously you can vlog in this phone and you've got a viewfinder on the bottom half of the screen, but it is kind of weird to hold. As you guys can see, it's kind of it takes up my whole hand to hold this thing. It's not an easy hold. But here's what the video and sound quality look like when you're vlogging on this back camera. Again, it is nice to have this viewfinder, but it is kind of difficult to hold, and if you have smaller hands, it's not going to be the easiest thing to hold in the world. And I am covering up part of the viewfinder with my hand. There we go. If I do it like this, it's not as bad. Samsung does kind of black out the side of the screen right there, so it does make it so you're not covering the entire viewfinder when you're holding it like this. So it is possible, it is definitely vloggable, but it's not the easiest vlogging setup I've ever used in my life. And obviously the cameras are still good on this phone, but they're just not as good as the S24 Ultra, and for $2,000, that's kind of a bummer. If you're not comparing the camera one-to-one against some of Samsung's other camera phones, it's very, very good. It does a great job of video taking. It does 8K, which is wild, up to 30 frames per second. You've also got good color recreation. It's a Samsung camera. It's good. Of course, the camera app that they give you has so many different settings. You can change basically everything about the way that the phone takes pictures. Portrait mode, video, all that sort of good stuff, slow-mo. So many different options when it comes to taking photos on your phone. It's more than enough. It's just when you're paying $2,000 for a phone, or I guess $1,900 for a phone if you buy the cheapest version of the phone, you'd want a little bit more. Speaking of things that I feel like are lacking on this phone, specifically because of the price, the first is that you don't get an S Pen. Even though this phone is S Pen capable, albeit only on the inner screen, not on the outer screen, which is very odd to me. For $1,900, you don't get an S Pen. I understand that they didn't integrate the S Pen into the phone like they did with the S24 Ultra, but the fact that you don't get it at all is kind of odd. I know I keep bringing up the price, but let me just kind of go through it really quickly just so you guys know what you're getting yourself into if you do decide to buy this phone. So the base phone comes in at a retail price of $1,900, up from $1,800 last year, and for that you get 256 gigabytes of internal storage. If you want to bump up the storage to 512, you pay another $120, making the price $2,019.99 or $2,020. And then if you want to go all out and grab the 1 terabyte phone, it costs you $2,259.99 or $2,260. So if you're buying the 1 terabyte version of this phone, you are paying basically $2,300 for a phone, which is absurd. That being said, in terms of large foldable phones, I think in a lot of ways, the Samsung Z Fold 6 is probably the best one out there. It's the most full-featured. The build quality is absolutely amazing. I mean, the durability of this phone compared to previous versions, the actual shape of the phone, it just feels premium. It's awesome. And I really can't overstate how good that inner screen is. I mean, it's incredible. It's beautiful, it's bright, it feels good to the touch, it's awesome. And of course, now you have a bunch of AI features, which yes, will be available in some older Samsung phones, but won't be available on really any other brand's phones. I mean, it's an incredible phone, and yes, there are things I'd like to change about it, but overall, it's an excellent, excellent device. And if you're buying it specifically for media consumption, probably the best phone that you can get. So if you have the cash and you want to buy just an insane foldable phone, then I think this phone is worth it. That said, if you don't have the cash, or maybe have the older version of this phone, I don't think you need to spend the extra $2,000 to get it. Now maybe in the future I'll be able to test more large format foldable phones and I can kind of compare them to this phone, but for right now my experience with this phone has been excellent. There are some small gripes that I have, but overall I give this phone an A+. But hey, at this point in the video I would love to know your thoughts on the Samsung Z Fold 6 and whether you'd like to buy this phone, whether you already have a Z Fold phone, or whether you think this phone is stupid. Let me know all the thoughts in the comment section down below. Also make sure to hit that subscribe button if you watched all the way through and you like my channel. We're about to hit 100,000 subscribers. I can't believe it, it's crazy. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.